Welcome back. You're watching News Center. The Defence Acquisition Council, led by Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, has approved a deal for acquiring the Predator or MQ-9 Reaper drones from the United States. At a meeting in the national capital today, the nod comes ahead of Prime Minister Modi's first state visit to the United States next week. Sources say the acquisition proposal will now have to be cleared by the Cabinet Committee on Security. 15 of the drones will be allotted for surveillance operations to the Indian Navy, which is set to be the lead agency for the deal. Meanwhile, today, June 15th, also marks 3 years of the Galwan Valley incident when Indian and Chinese troops clashed along LAC in eastern Ladakh, leaving 20 Indian soldiers dead and 5 Chinese soldiers also were killed in that clash. Joining us now to take this forward is former General Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Indian Army's Northern Command, Lieutenant General D.S. Hooda. Lieutenant General Hooda, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you about the approval for Predator drones, these Reaper drones. How important an acquisition is this for the Indian Defence Forces, for the Navy? How does this help us in countering the threats that we face currently?
So, Parikshit, thank you for inviting me to the program. As you mentioned, I think this deal is hugely significant. Currently, our capability in terms of unmanned aerial vehicles, as we call them UAVs, we do have some Israeli equipment, but the MQ-9 is a very significant technology jump over what we have today. I mean, its ability to carry out surveillance, also its arm capability, will bring in a huge boost to the Indian Defence Forces. As far as the Navy is concerned, I think the maritime domain awareness is going to be hugely improved, as is our ability to be able to carry out surveillance along our borders, both on the line of control and more significantly on the line of actual control, where because of high altitude areas, we've always had some problems of sustainability of our UAVs that are flying in these areas. So to me, it's a very significant procurement.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the larger contours of the Prime Minister's state visit to the United States next week. Defense is going to be a big focus. Critical and emerging technology transfer is a big focus of this deal. We're talking about sale of defense equipment, UAVs, and the GE-HAL deal for jet engines is also done. How important will this visit be in terms of our national security, General Hooda? And what will be the timeline within which or by when we will start reaping the benefits of this visit that happens next week?
So, Parikshit, if you actually look at the trajectory of India-US relations, and we know that, they are on a very positive in a very positive direction they're going. But if you look at the overall bilateral ties, in some ways, the lead agencies have been the Pentagon on the US side and the Ministry of Defense on the Indian side. So defense cooperation has been a very significant factor in improvement of the India-US bilateral ties. And today, if you look at the larger geopolitical picture, the challenge that China poses, in some ways, the common strategic approaches that India and US have, the growing partnership in Quad, you talked about partnering in emerging technologies. I think all these are now coming to some kind of maturity, and the Prime Minister's visit is going to put us, some kind of a stamp or seal on these issues. Sometimes in the past we have said that while there has been a lot of talk about cooperation, the fact is that we haven't seen significant technology transfer from the US to India. But what we are now approaching, and I hope that comes to fruition in the Prime Minister's visit to the US, is that you will actually see some significant technology transfers happening from the US to India.
Right. I'd also like to ask you about our preparedness as far as the LAC is concerned. It's been 3 years since the Galwan clashes. Tensions remain at their peak. There is border infrastructure build-up on both areas. How do you see threats in eastern Ladakh? And how do you think our closeness with the United States and the growing partnership could impact things in the months to come, General Hooda, because we've got Secretary Blinken also going to China this week. He will be meeting the Foreign Minister of China and meeting a whole host of other officials. How will China be looking at this visit that Prime Minister is making to the United States?
So, Parikshit, I think you used the correct word, that the things along the border, on the LAC between the India-China border, things are tense. And I say things are tense because of the kind of infrastructure build-up, the additional troops that have got deployed. And we have seen in the past, violent clashes have taken place. The latest one was in Yangtze when hundreds of Chinese soldiers tried to intrude into our territory, and there was actually a physical clash. So things along the LAC are today tense. Also because there's been almost a complete breakdown of confidence-building measures. At a time like this, we are seeing ties between India and the US are strengthening. And obviously, I sense that China is worried about this. Because if you look at some of their recent statements, they have been trying to tell India, look, you need to maintain your strategic autonomy. The US will push you into some kind of conflict with China. They have been criticizing the Americans on whatever statements they make about what's happening on the India-China LAC. So yes, they are going to look at it with concern. But the fact, Parikshit, is that we have to look at things from our national interest point of view. We had a very close defense partnership with Russia. Unfortunately, because of the war that is there, we are hearing that some of the reliance on the equipment that was there, the Russians are not going to be able to supply us what we need, their own needs, plus the fact that we need to diversify. The fact that we are looking at an Atmanirbhar program where technologies will be required to come in from countries like the US. So yes, Chinese could look at the growing closeness between India and the US with a bit of suspicion. But it's in our national interest to go ahead with it, and that's what I think we should do.
Right. And what is the situation currently at the border in terms of finding a solution? Do you think there's any solution in sight, or are we just looking at the next few years where the standoff continues and there is no real breakthrough?
So, Parikshit, I don't want to be a pessimist, but what we have seen in the last 3 years, that while there has been some move forward on disengagement, in areas on the north and south bank of Pangong, so PP-15, Gogra, and at Galwan, we are still stuck on the major issue, which is Tepsang Plains, where a very large chunk of what India claims as its own territory is being denied to us, and we are not able to patrol up to our traditional patrolling area. And I see very little sort of move forward happening in that area. We've also seen, in the initial years, it was thought that the conditions along the LAC are very harsh, and therefore there is a limit to how many troops you can deploy and how many troops you can sustain, and that in itself could be a reason for both countries to disengage. I'm afraid that notion has been disabused. We've been at it for 3 years. Almost 60,000 additional soldiers have got pumped in on both sides. Infrastructure has got built up. Infrastructure also for sustaining combat operations has come up in a big way on both sides. So I think I don't see an immediate sort of breakthrough happening as far as the situation along the LAC is concerned.
All right. So let's wait and see what happens over the next few months and how the Prime Minister's visit to the US also pans out. Thanks very much, General Hooda, for joining us here on CNBC TV18. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. More news and updates continue right here.